Hey everybody, Shay Baker here. I put out a little feeler on Instagram a few days ago and asked if y'all would be interested in a break down your water kind of deal where we go in and use some of these different apps and tools to look at a lake we've never seen before, me and some of the other guys. So I'm going to do the first one, and this is actually a request from Jay Peters, and it's Island Lake in Duluth, Minnesota. So there's the lake, and we got the topo pulled up. It's got a little bit of topo on it with the Navionics app. And first thing I saw when I went to the lake, which I'm not surprised because of the time of the year, but more so the satellite image just happened to line up with it, is that's hard water. As far as breaking down water, I meant breaking down soft water. I guess I should have been a little bit more specific, but I'll talk about what I would do or what I think I would do, the things I would try when I first arrived when it thaws out. But as far as drilling a hole through the ice, and I don't know how to do that. So that's not an Alabama thing. So anyway, we'll look at kind of some of the satellite imagery of the end of the lake here that is open. And I've got my phone pulled up on the screen where you guys can see the Angler app, the Navionics app, some other stuff. But like right in here, see, this is where kind of the dividing line was between the images where it was froze over and where it's not. And looking at this little cove, this is one of the first places I found that I really like the looks of. It's got some shoreline vegetation. It's got a few docks. And that's right up my alley. There's a few pads and some, looks like a lot of matted stuff, really. And if that's the case, I would go to punching and throwing a frog at the right time of the year. Whenever the ice thawed out, the fish are starting to kind of try to spawn. It may be June or July for you guys up there. I don't know. But that looks like really good stuff and stuff I'm used to, familiar with. And the docks, I mean, the docks are a good deal too. They'll hold fish a lot of times. So I'd look at that. Even way back, I love getting back in these little bitty ditches and little pockets and stuff. And one way you can always tell if you can get, or most of the time you can tell if you can get back into places like this is if they have docks. So you can see these docks here. I mean, that is a clear sign, especially if it's a dock with a boat beside it. So there's a boat out in the middle there. More than likely, that's a boat, that little white speck. So once you start seeing that, I mean, you could have a dock without a boat on it, and it just be a dock somebody's got at their house where they want to go out and fish off the dock. But if it's got a boat beside it, that's a good sign that you can get back in there. And I love this little area here. Like I said, it looks like maybe even some pads and some little reed clumps and stuff like that. So I would right away, I'd drop a waypoint here, vegetation, go ahead and put in, you know, a few of these back here to kind of really make sure I remember. And then like these mats here, I believe, like I said, that looks like matted vegetation there. And that's right up my alley. So that kind of stuff. And as far as what I would fish with there, frogs, you know, like I said, frogs are good. I brought a few baits in here to kind of go over what I would do. But right time of the year, and I've caught some fish up north in little places like that with a frog, but it's more up around New York State. But as far as the north part of the country, it's pretty close probably. Maybe this may be a little bit further north, but frogs like that, I mean, you know, just a walking style frog. I think it's a Spro, Dean Rojas Spro frog, and popping frogs. This is a totally different fishery, but it's very similar. This is a fish catch from Lake Seminole this past year, and you can see it's the same kind of deal. It's lily pads, and when y'all's fish are going up and around the spawn and post spawn, they'll get real aggressive and try to eat. I imagine the same way ours do. So, like right here, I mean, this is a big one. And she was post spawn, but in these pads and this vegetation. So, anytime I go somewhere new, depending on what time of year it is, if it's around that, you know, pre or post spawn, pre-spawn, I wouldn't be throwing a frog so much, but they still get in these areas, and this is just a big spawning flat on Lake Seminole. But post-spawn, that's when I would definitely move to the frog and do some punching and try to catch these fish, you know, that are kind of outside the spawning areas. So those little pockets like that are real good for that. And again, you know, if that's matted vegetation, which I believe it is, that's where I would come in and punch, like you see here. It's just a little mat on a lake down here, Eufaula, but it looks very similar. That's more shoreline stuff here. These are kind of spaced out in the middle of a opening, but it's kind of like, you know, some matted vegetation. So in that situation, I'm using an 1.5 ounce weight with a Missile Baits D-bomb and a 4/0 heavy-duty flipping hook from VMC. I use a jumbo peg. It's basically a rubber toothpick that you shove up through the weight to keep the weight in place, and it's about that simple on my punch setup. There's a really big article. I actually have an article on angler.com about punching and about frogging, and both of them are massive articles. I mean, 4,000 or 5,000 words. So if you want to check those out, you can find them at angler.com. The dock deal, I mean, if I'm going to fish these docks, I'm either going to skip that frog around them or use something like a wacky rig, stick bait, Cinco. This is a Missile Baits 48 here, but something with a wacky rig deal to it. You just got a circle hook, and it's got a little weed guard on it. I think that's a little VMC hook too. You just skip it around those docks, and that may be a better deal when they're actually trying to spawn. They may be spawning, if those have poles on them, they'll spawn on those poles. So obviously this isn't stuff that's going to help you right now, but that's because your lake's froze over. So you're on your own on that part. But given the right time of the year, this stuff will work. So there's some more docks out here. It looks like a little shallow point right there. So maybe that's a little staging point. You can kind of see it underwater there. So I'm going to put a waypoint there. Let's see. Just going to do maybe like a shelf there. It's kind of like a little shelf or a point. Let's zoom out and see if we can tell on Navionics what that looks like. So there's a bridge right there. Let's see if we can tell. I believe this is that bridge right there. So I believe that's that point there. Let's see. That's a little closer to that bridge. It's kind of a little subtle point. May not even show up on Navionics that well. I believe that's that bridge. Yeah, maybe that's it there. See if that's even the right bridge. Am I looking at the right bridge here? Yeah. Must be right in that area. Yeah, there's a little island out in front of it. So it's kind of the right of this island here. Just this little point here. So there's a little point you can kind of see on both images there. So that little deal there, I mean, you got kind of deeper water around it. That might be a pretty good little place to look for them before they get up on bed. Some of those fish, you know, might make their way around into this little ditch that we was talking about that come back in here and spawn, but while they're kind of moving up, and I don't know, I mean, this lake may be full of smallmouth. It may have largemouth. I don't know. But if it has largemouth, I'd say that's kind of one of those little places where they might stage and then move back up in there. I think if it has smallmouth, the smallmouth may just spawn on that point and not go back into that pocket. But going back over to the Angler app where we had the satellite image pulled up, this little bridge here, it looks like most of it's a causeway. On that, I don't know if I have a little crankbait in here. I don't think I do. But for something like that, a square bill will be real good. Certain times of the year, just go up and down that riprap with a square bill, kind of pre-spawn when they're getting ready to move up and they're just trying to eat a lot. Around that actual opening there, if there's a lot of bait, I don't know how much bait there is on this fishery, but if there's a good bit of bait, you can take a kind of like an underspin or a swarming hornet, bladed head bait, underspin, you know, kind of deal, and rig up a little 3-inch swim bait and throw it out there. And a lot of times those fish will suspend kind of in these areas if there's a little bit of current, you know, if the wind makes a little bit of current. So go out here and we'll just put a little honey hole waypoint on each side of this. And that's just kind of one of those deals where if the fish are suspended, either pre or post spawn, you always want to kind of watch around those bridges. And either, I mean, sometimes that's a little too flashy with a blade. And if it is, just go to a small swim bait. And you're just mimicking, you know, bait fish. So you just want to go to a small swim bait with a little jig head or shaky head and throw it around. And just let it kind of pendulum down and slow roll it, especially if you can see the bait on the graph. It works real well to just kind of count it down to get it to the right depth. and then reel it through those areas. So that's one of the things that kind of stood out. And again, like all these little pockets are probably good little spawning areas. So, you know, I'd still put little places like that. And what we'll call that one, let's just say we'll do vegetation again. It's kind of shallow, kind of a shallow spot, but look for them to spawn in little places like that. See what else is thawed out in the picture here. Here's another little backwater. All these little backwaters is what I'd look at right away. I mean, I love these little places. And listen again, like that might be a little mat right out there in the middle. And so I brought one rod in. I didn't bring a lot of rods because I'm inside my office here. But I did bring my punch rod in because I wanted to show just kind of that setup. This one's been used a good bit. It's got chips on it. It's an older weight. But 4/0 straight shank, heavy duty flipping hook. That's like missile baits D-bomb there. And then that weight, I really like pegging it versus using a bobber stopper. And the reason is, see how it's kind of suspended just a little bit above my bait? If it has a bobber stopper up here, the weight just pounds on that and tears up a lot more baits. But if you have it just slightly suspended, see with a peg, you can kind of move it up and down your line. So I just kind of put it right there above my bait. And that way it's still kind of aerodynamic or hydrodynamic enough to go through the mat well, but it's not pounding on top of that bait. You don't waste a lot of baits. So that's that setup, and it's the big jig heavy mat flipping rod from Fitzgerald. Caught a lot of big fish on that rod. Luge Super Duty reel, like 65-pound suffix braid. You got to have the right kind of stuff when you go into those mats because you don't want to get that bite and not get them out. So I'm going to mark that too. But all those little spots like that, I mean, once you get bit in a place like that, a place like these marked back here, you can kind of start to put a pattern together and move around a lot and probably duplicate it once you figure out kind of what's going on. Here's another, looks like another little shell for underwater deal. You see how this looks like it's got a lot of clear water. It's pretty clear, and maybe even tannic a little bit, which would be odd because that's mostly down in Florida, but it's almost got like a dark color. But there's a little shelf that runs from here to here, looks like. So if there are smallmouth in here, that'll probably be another little place where they'll kind of stage up, maybe even spawn on top of those humps. And I'd be interested to see if anybody's fished this fishery. Let me know if I'm way off base or anywhere near right. And I don't know anything about walleye or anything like that, or muskie, all this stuff I'm talking about is just purely largemouth and maybe a few smallmouth if they're in here. There's some more vegetation back there. I like the looks of that. So I'd mark that again. If you get bit on a frog, you go to a place like that, you probably get another bite on a frog. So those kind of places are pretty cool. Let's see. Again, these little islands out here. There's a little point right here. Looks like it runs out. So that kind of stuff. Depending on which pattern you're putting together. There's another little place. It's got, looks like some water you might even be able to throw into, but there's definitely some vegetation right there on the edge. So what's cool about this app, this is the Angler app again, and what's cool about it is you can kind of go in and you start to build patterns before you ever even go. So you see the vegetation marks, with the exception of this one on the south side that I marked in that shallow pocket. But you see all the little vegetation spots. What's cool is once you go out, now if you've built this map kind of before you go, you can go out and if you get a bite on one of those places, you can start running around to some of the other ones you've already got noted. And the same thing with the little shelves, the little purple icons. If you were to get bit on some of that stuff on some of the pre-spawn kind of deals, you can move around. So you got a lot of waypoint options in here to kind of build different patterns before you ever even get on the water. You can set up one, you know, and mark a lot of docks with it or whatever. So that way you kind of got a good starting point whenever you do get a few bites to go from there to another place. So let's see. Kind of getting back to the edge where I think that's maybe a little bit of that's either froze over along the banks or it's some vegetation or the water was down or something. So not knowing much about the fishery, I'm going to kind of just stay on these places where I know it's kind of thawed out. Again, here are a couple little points. So let's go over to the Navionics topo deal a little bit. Look at a little bit more of this, just kind of see. It looks like it's a fairly, got a little bit of depth. That's pretty deep hole right there. If that's accurate, 70 feet. It's got some deep little spots. There's another big hump out in the middle there. that you couldn't quite see on the satellite image. So that might be a real good place to catch them staging. Let's see. Might go in and mark that angler at. I believe it's kind of between these 2 points here. So one more time. Yeah. So it's kind of right out here. Pretty big shelf. Kind of running along through here. Let's go back over and see if we can see any more on the topo. I mean, this is kind of like a good, probably a pretty good spawning area. It's got a shallow flat, looks like. Not real shallow, so might not be quite shallow enough. But the thing I like about this is it's got all this protection out here, all these islands and these shelves and stuff. It's shallower stuff. So if the wind's blowing, it's not going to blow real hard back in here. And if it is blowing, you can either get on the back side of these islands or over here on this side, depending on which side the wind's coming from. So I kind of like that for maybe a spawning area, which it was frozen over in some of this stuff here. So maybe a spawning flat. Let's see. Do a honey hole waypoint and name it spawning flat. Maybe that'll be a good little spot to get out of the wind if you need to. Certain times of the year. What else? It's a pretty little lake. I mean, looks like this appears maybe thawed out too, part of the lake. So there's some more docks, small docks. It's fairly deep. Maybe not. Let's see. It's not too deep over there. Start to see kind of some of these areas. You can see a little bit of those shells and stuff, little shallow spots. Looks like maybe to be able to tie all the way back around. So maybe some of these dots back here could be good. There's some more vegetation again. It looks pretty good. So we'll mark a few of these kind of over here out of the way. In case you get bit in this area, you can move around. Yeah, there's some more vegetation around. So again, I like the looks of all that. This whole bank, it's a pretty good little stretch here, looks like, with a lot of vegetation. I like this too. If this is a big mat, which I don't know, it's kind of what it looks like. It looks like a big matted out pocket. If that's the case, that's where you can really get in and punch and kind of work an area and maybe get multiple bites instead of just one little mat. So I'm going to put a few waypoints there. Still a lot more loose, kind of scattered vegetation. It's a pretty little lake. I doubt I'll ever make my way up there. It's, they no telling, probably 25 hours from where I live, 25 hours from Alabama. And it probably only have a few months where it's thawed out. So I wish you guys well, but I doubt I'll make it up there. It's some cloud cover, but it looks like these clouds are kind of casting a shadow. But underneath those clouds, it's like pretty good little mats and stuff back here too. So anyway, that's kind of what I would do. I may be completely wrong, but I would take a punch rod. I'd probably do a swim jig too. I brought one of those in here just to see. It's a Nichols lure swim jig with and it's got a little missile baits trailer on the back, twin turbo. But take a swim jig like that, and if they're not quite aggressive enough to come up and get that frog, or even as a compliment, sometimes I'll have a frog still rigged up and also have one of these guys where if they kind of boil on a frog, even if you're catching several on a frog, if you do miss one, you can throw a swim jig back in there. But that's probably what I'd go with. And probably a spinnerbait too. And that's, you know, always pretty steady to have rigged up whenever you're fishing around pre-spawn and spawners and post-spawn. A little bit of wind gets up, throw a spinnerbait. It's a good call. A lot more vegetation. I love, like, this little pocket here looks really good. So it's another frogging, you know, look at all the scattered vegetation. Frogging and flipping. That's good stuff. I'd even try to get, it looks like you probably can, I'd even try to sneak under this bridge if I could get under there. It looks pretty shallow, but man, if you go into places like that, little hidey holes where nobody's paying attention and not many people fish, especially if you have a kayak or a small boat, those kind of little places right there can be loaded. and could get you a real big one. Which a big one up here, I would imagine, like y'all's largemouth, usually up north don't really grow that big, but I mean that's kind of like a 4 or 5 pounder spot. It looks like to me where you might get one of those real big ones that you don't see very often. Well, that gives you a pretty good bit with what I got to work with here. I mean, that's a lot of waypoints on just what looks good. You know, you go out there and you start whittling down on some of this stuff, and you start getting better, don't get better. You find places where the vegetation doesn't look the same the next year. But that's it. Let's break down your water. We went out here and we looked at Island Lake. I believe it's called Island Reservoir. And a little bit north of, Island Lake Reservoir, a little bit north of Duluth, Minnesota. And again, this is what we're talking about up here. And I'm way down here talking about it. So, I could be completely incorrect. But, maybe it'll help. Let me know if you guys want to see more of these. That was pretty cool. Pretty cool little lake to look at, so. Pull up the waypoints there. I'll share a few of these waypoints too in the description underneath the video, so you can have some of them to go check out sometime. And let me know if it helps. Probably about 5 months before you'll be able to tell me. But let me know. Let me know if you guys want to see some more of this. Thanks.